yeah, for sure.
Thank you, Pop. All right. We good? Yes. All right, cool. Well, welcome to the School of Public Affairs National Security Seminar Series. I'm Thomas Zaitzoff. I'm a professor here in the School of Public Affairs. And today we're tackling one of the most consequential challenges facing our democracy and our national security, the weaponization of misinformation and disinformation. We're fortunate to have two leading voices on this topic. We have JJ Green. He's the national security correspondent at WTOP and the author of the new book, The Noise War. Highly encourage everybody to get a copy. It's well written and also highly relevant. He's been embedded with the U.S. military in Iraq, Afghanistan, and East Africa and reported from over 50 countries and won more than 40 journalism awards, including the Gerald R. Ford Award for distinguishing reporting on national defense. And we're also joined by Brett Schaefer. He's a senior fellow at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, formerly the Alliance for Securing Democracy at the German Marshall Fund. He created the Hamilton 2.0 dashboard, which tracks Russian, Chinese, and Iranian state media. He's a leading expert on propaganda and tech regulation. Let's dive right in. All right, JJ, your book talks about the idea that disinformation has evolved dramatically in recent years. How has it changed, and what do you see as sort of driving this?
The way it's changed and what's driving it is technology. The fact that we all depend on information to do everything that we do is something that it's been attacked, it's been harnessed, and it's been marshaled against us. And the objective here is for people to understand that disinformation, just as itself, just a lie, is harmful enough. But when you have tactics, when you have AI, when you have tools that essentially just push it out, just scale it up in such a way that it's impossible for a human to address just what it's pushing out, the way that it's scaling it up, very big. And then you have these other AI tools that are just blasting it out there at a speed that just make it impossible to keep up with. So just to boil it down, the threat we face today is not one that we as a person, a human, can actually defeat. It's something that requires a different approach. Disinformation is not going to ever stop. It's always going to be with us. So what we have to do, in my view, is to find ways, one, to recognize that disinformation is something. It's not chaos. It's a system, but we can recognize systems, we can disrupt systems, and we can beat systems. And that's my whole approach to disinformation, is to figure out ways to stop what it does. One of the things that it does is it rewires us. It doesn't just twist facts. It makes us move too fast. It keeps us upset, and it also makes us think emotion is evidence of something taking place. So my whole view is it starts with three things. First, do not be afraid, because that's what disinformation wants in most cases for us to do, is to be afraid. The purveyors, I should say, not the lie itself. I mean, the most dangerous lies are not the outrageous ones. The most dangerous lies are the ones that are familiar. So the first thing is, don't be afraid. Number two, stay calm, because that is the other thing that it doesn't want us to do. And the third thing is to slow down. Just slow the roll, and just take a minute to look at the state that we're in, the place that we're in, and what's taking place around us. And when you look at where we are right now, this is very important. This is an election year in the United States. The United States has done a lot of different things in the last year. Go back to the Munich Security Conference of 2025, and you saw how the U.S. sort of spoke to its allies. It was signaling what it was going to do and the approach that it was going to take. This year, before the Munich Security Conference, some of the stuff that was spoken turned into reality. Greenland. Canada, just the inability, or not even inability, I guess the deliberate decision to put the U.S. as allies, to keep them off guard. This is one of the key things, one of the key, I guess the best way to put this, is one of the key foundations of disinformation. It's a chaotic environment. People, organizations just can never get their footing. That's one of the things that makes disinformation work. So right now, that's, I think, what's most important. And what this book does is it gives people tools and tactics to deal with it. It's 95 pages. You can read it in an hour and 20 minutes. It's got 11 chapters and a conclusion, and each chapter it's short, couple pages, but these exercises, tactics, tools, and tips at the end of the book are things that you can take with you for a lifetime. It's common sense, but it's also recognizing that you have to evolve the tactics that you're going to use to address an aggressive assailant like disinformation in 2026, which, mind you, by the time we get to June, it may be a whole other thing, something we really do need to continue to evolve to stay up with.
Well, I want to ask Brett. So first of all, JJ, I appreciate the note of optimism in there. I definitely appreciate that in 2026. Brett, you cover kind of a slightly different vantage point, and I wanted you to maybe walk us through what you see as some of the most significant shifts in how foreign actors are thinking about and targeting the U.S. now.
Yeah, so I started this work in 2016. I was actually in the U.S. Embassy in Moscow in 2016. So some of this was happening kind of right outside the gates, not to my knowledge at the time. But when I started this work, the initial things we were very concerned about were fake accounts. So Russians sitting in St. Petersburg pretending to be Americans, Russian bot farms being rolled out to sort of amplify the most polarizing voices. It has not disappeared, but it is not the threat we are most concerned about now. One, because the tech companies, even though they have really backed off being an ally in this fight, they still care about fake accounts. They'll still take action, and it's relatively easy to deal with that problem. What we are seeing increasingly now is they've figured out what our kryptonite is in the US, but I would just say the West in general, and that is our free speech, our openness. So if they can launder information through an individual or an outlet or an entity that exists in the target country, let's just take the US, if they can use a US citizen or a US outlet to launder their information into the information space, they know the tech companies don't want to touch it, government definitely doesn't want to touch it, researchers don't want to touch it. And so increasingly we're seeing them outsource a lot of their information activities to witting and unwitting Americans.
Useful idiots and this sort of thing.
Useful idiots, and at times, I mean, really people who are unaware of the fact they are being covertly funded by the Russian government. So the classic case from last year was, or 2 years ago, Tenet Media, which was a Tennessee-based company, hired 6 of the biggest political podcasters on the conservative right. The podcasters were unaware of the fact Tenet Media was funded entirely by the Russian government. But we're seeing increasingly things like using the gig economy to launder information. So people were paid to just post videos, actual Americans. And now in Europe, their real concern is a lot of this activity that's been happening online is moving offline. So we're seeing a lot of sabotage activities, vandalism. And so they're doing this just the same way you would hire like a TaskRabbit to fix an IKEA piece of furniture. They're finding people who are disaffected, low-level criminals, paying them $100 to go out in the streets of Vienna, break a few car windows, and slap political posters up, presenting it as being the work of an opposition party. So that's been the real shift, is it's harder to say that this is just a sort of walled-off foreign problem, because intentionally they are sort of intermingling themselves with domestic players, which makes it much more difficult to counter.
No, it's great. We've talked, I think both of you guys have talked about sort of the domestic front. And JJ, as a reporter who's covered national security for a long time in Washington, I have to ask you, I mean, we were talking about Stephen Colbert and some of the FCC recent, strong-arming of the media in different ways. How has the domestic information environment changed in the second Trump administration? What's different about doing the work that you've been doing for a long time, but now?
Well, on the 15th of October, I had to give up my credentials to the Pentagon because the Pentagon said to me, either you sign this memo and pledge to report only what we tell you, or you give up your credentials and get out. That's how it's changed in this administration. In the first administration, arguably, we've heard this from a number of different sources that there were people around the president and around the administration that prevented things like this from happening, and that now there aren't. Well, regardless of whether that was the case or not, this started on day one of the Trump administration when it was very clear that the regular business was not going to be taking place with this administration in the White House. Certain reporters were not allowed in the Oval Office, weren't allowed on planes. On June 25th, I gave a speech to the Cooperstown, New York League of Women Voters, and I talked to them about what I was seeing in Washington, in journalism here in Washington, and that I feared that it was going to get worse. And I told them at that time, we're all going to have to make some hard decisions in this country. And, many reporters in the White House and in other places had to make those decisions early on. My day came on the 15th of October. That's how that's how things have changed in this administration. It's very clear what it is they want to do. And they're not interested in us saying, well, this is the way it should be, or this is how it's always been done. Their objective, and this has been made very clear to us, this is a new day for them. And this is a new plan, this is a new process. The question is, what are we going to do about what we're guaranteed in terms of, as journalists, our rights? And I made that decision along with some folks at the Pentagon, some other reporters who are way smarter and way better than I am, that was something that we couldn't stand for. And so we will see what that means to Americans and other people, because there will come a day when others are going to have to make some tough choices. It may not be in journalism, it may be your job wherever else it is. It may be where you live, it may be what you do on a weekend, it may be where you go to relax, to visit. Is it safe to do? So there are just going to be difficult things that people are going to have to do, but that's how things have changed in this new Trump administration.
Great. Brett, I want to ask you sort of about U.S. domestic politics and how that is kind of viewed, not just maybe the U.S., but we'll say kind of broadly, because you also do a lot of work in Europe. How is that viewed in kind of adversary countries like Russia, China, other places where maybe they have different goals than, we'll say, a lot of kind of the traditional NATO alliance countries? How do they see what's happening in the West and in the U.S. Domestic politics wise?
Well, it's interesting, and it's a bit ironic that as the U.S. has sort of thrown aside 100 years of alliances, or at least is threatening to throw them aside, Russia and China, who very much have been pushing for the end of the Western-led U.S. or the U.S.-led global order, the West in general, that has been a constant theme in their messaging since I started doing this work a decade ago. Now that moment is here, I think they're actually a little bit uneasy about it. And that was very clear after Venezuela in their messaging. It was a defense of the rules-based order, which, China is different from Russia. We shouldn't lump them together. I mean, China's always wanted to kind of change the rules from within, where Russia was sort of flipped the tables over and a little bit more of a chaos agent. But even Russia, there was an element of anxiety about what the world looks like if the U.S. is no longer following a rules-based order. And so I think even though this is something they have advocated for, that has been a sort of constant, I'm not sure they love what they're actually seeing and what a a completely sort of chaotic U.S. would mean for them in the world. So it's a bit of a contradiction if you look at their messaging over years and years and years versus where they are now, where it's, a U.S. that's not supporting Ukraine in the way that it was before. That's a good thing, but a U.S. that is totally unpredictable and not following the rules, I don't think they love that condition.
Interesting. So it's a little bit of buyer beware, be careful, kind of what you wish for. I want to ask both of you kind of on this sort of underlying causes kind of misinformation. And I want to come back to this again at the end when we talk about what's coming in technology. But I'm a political scientist by training, and so some of my political science colleagues, they see misinformation and disinformation as an important topic, but also as kind of maybe it's not the main thing, it's a side effect. And what we're seeing with misinformation and disinformation is that it's really what we're picking up on is deep disagreement within U.S. domestic politics, other Western countries, about the future of the West, foreign policy, other sorts of things, and that misinformation is kind of a side effect of these deeper sort of fractures in how we see the world, in both domestically but also in foreign policy. I mean, I want to pose that to both of you. What do you guys think about that view?
Well, first, it's important to note that there's a difference between misinformation and disinformation. And misinformation is accidental, typically. Disinformation is engineered. And I agree with you that disinformation isn't out there as some sentient being just kind of moving things around in the world. It's a symptom of something that's much bigger. But to boil it down to people, which is what this is all about anyway, getting people to do what some entity wants people to do, is the way I look at it is this. We all have, the reason why disinformation is successful is because, not because we're stupid, it's because we're human. It's because we have fear and anger, and there are people we don't like. Let's be honest. There are organizations and things, places we don't like. And the objective of the purveyors of disinformation and even misinformation, yes, the objective is to get us to give up trying to figure out what is happening. It's not to get us to do one side or the other, but it's just to get us to throw our hands up and stop trying. And in that way, I would imagine if there is some overarching strategy or plan by the purveyors, whoever they might be, because a lot of people, anybody can do it that wants to, but it really depends on what your plan is. But from my perspective, that really is the thing. If people know that, yes, the fact that you don't like your next door neighbor is a problem, then they need to know that that's a problem, because that's really the essence of how things like disinformation grows. It's divides between people for whatever reason. And so I just think that this is something that, we just need to think about.
I mean, I think they're reinforcing. So, are we polarized because of disinformation, or is disinformation working because we're polarized? I mean, I think they're kind of working in tandem, and it's hard to say necessarily that one sort of led the other. But I think the conditions, countries that are less polarized have less issues with disinformation. Yeah. That's clear. I mean, we always look at like the Baltic states and to some degree the Nordic countries as being sort of the gold standards in media literacy and having good approaches to countering this. But as soon as those societies become a little bit more polarized around an issue, so Sweden over the last couple of years around migration, disinformation picks up and it starts landing more. And so I'm not sure that you can kind of detach one from the other, because they are kind of driving in the same direction quite often. And so, one of the things when we talk about like combating disinformation and just the information environment writ large being disordered, the issue isn't disinformation as a sort of abstract standalone thing. Like as JJ mentioned, like a lie is a problem, like nobody likes a liar. The problem with disinformation is it makes it harder to solve every other problem in the world. So whether you care about migration, climate change, polarization, they're all made more difficult by disinformation. Misinformation too, but we are concerned about the people who are intentionally lying to you. And so that to me is what makes it kind of more of an existential threat. It's not just that it's a lie, it is that we no longer have even remotely a sort of common understanding of facts from which we can then argue our opposite positions. Yeah. We are spinning in totally different orbits now, and I see that just in my own life. You know, when I started this work, I felt like a little bit like an anthropologist studying communities that were not my own when I went online. That is definitely not the case now. And from both sides of the political spectrum. I mean, I went to high school in South Georgia, so a very conservative group of high school friends. My parents are still down there. I would say they were kind of first to go, but I see it more now with liberal friends as well. Just this inherent mistrust of everything. I mean, to give you an example, recently, you know, the kidnapping of Savannah Guthrie's mother, and I have friends who are absolutely convinced that this is a government plot to distract from the Epstein files. And I mean, things that they just would not have thought about 5 years ago have kind of crept into the mainstream.
Yeah. I want to ask you guys both, and I'll start with you, JJ. I mean, I remember going back to like the U.S. Institute of Peace back when it was there and doing like stuff on, you know, content moderation of, you know, extremist content, misinformation. And I think we're now post 2024, we're in a world where we have, you know, what content moderation we have is maybe slanted, but there's a lot less content moderation than it used to be. And we have X letting rip with AI images. We have TikTok. We have all these things. So we're at this moment where generative AI is getting there, and also content moderation is pulling back a bit. I mean, what's that mean for disinformation?
Well, that's the reason why I wrote this book.
Yeah.
It's because people don't need any more theory. I mean, they don't need any more classes, you know, if you will.
We do, though. We do need classes. I'm just going to say this. We already.
Yeah, you guys,
don't put me out of business, JJ.
You need classes because you're paying for them. But I'm saying the people that aren't in these classes because they have to be. No, just kidding. Yeah. But no, I mean, Thomas does a great job here, and the fact that you're here is evidence of that. But what I'm saying is, and what he's doing and what AU is doing, what you're doing here is necessary. But what I'm saying is we don't need any more, anything. There's nothing to create in that regard. This is, again, the reason why I wrote this book is because this fuses what UNESCO has told us about how to address disinformation with what NATO says from a strategic point of view. And I've injected some journalistic experience into it to make it palatable and simple for people from high school, from 16 to 116. You know, so the objective is agency, right? Because it helps you to understand how disinformation works and how even really smart people can be suckers for disinformation. And it's for every age, and it's for use everywhere. It helps, again, for us it teaches us how to slow it down. It teaches us how to filter it, and it teaches us how not to amplify disinformation while we're fighting it. So to get back to your question, and I hope I haven't kind of gone off the rails here and even forgotten the question, but you can help me with that if you want. But
moderation, no moderation.
So we have to be our own moderators, is what I was going to get at here, and this is the objective here: is to give people need the tools themselves to moderate, because we can't depend on the moderators or the content moderation anymore. We've got to do it for ourselves. And people one of the things that's in this book is Brett's work, the Hamilton 2.0 dashboard, strongly recommended. It's still active, right?
Yeah.
And it's still at work. It helps you spot inauthentic narratives, and it helps you to track, and it helps you to understand what it is so that you can figure out. So the objective here for me is not to tell you what to think. It's to help you not get played, not get manipulated by all these efforts and organizations that say, yeah, we're going to help moderate content, and we're going to continue to do what we do to keep your social feed cutting edge and stuff. But you have to be able to understand that you're the ultimate moderator. We had a former president who used to call himself the decider in chief, right? So you're the decider in chief.
The tech companies obviously have pulled back significantly. I mean, just in my personal work, we used to talk to the tech companies regularly. I mean, just informally. And again, this was not like tipping them to take down content. It was just an exchange of like what we're seeing, the threat environment, getting back. I haven't had a conversation with anyone at a tech company in 2 years. I mean, they don't want to be on an email with us because of the environment we're in, where there has been painted this very binary picture of a sort of free speech internet that Elon supposedly represents, and this sort of censored, moderated internet. The free speech internet is a myth. It's a fantasy. Every company curates the information that you see. So even if you take the approach that Elon has of basically anything goes that's not illegal, he still has to decide how the algorithms prioritize certain content over other content. And getting to very basic examples of like a search engine. If you put something into a search engine, something has to show up first. Yeah. Something has to show up in the top 10, and as every study has shown, if you're not in the top 10, you might as well not exist. So if you are rigging the systems to make a certain piece of speech show up higher, this is just the curated world we live in. So this idea that somehow the Elons of the world and Zuckerberg, who's done his U-turn, are now promoting free speech is just, it's nonsense. And so we have to kind of disabuse ourselves of that sort of binary notion. It just doesn't really exist anymore. And then the thing that really concerns me going forward, though, is with AI and with chatbots increasingly being the first point of contact people come in contact with information that they seek out, there's even less transparency about the decision-making processes that feed into what results are being shown to people. So when we would train people around media literacy, you're always taught, try to figure out the source. That wasn't always easy because, of course, sources were laundered, but you at least had some sense of agency, that you knew what was there, and if you did your research, you could figure out if it's trustworthy. Nobody has a clue what's feeding in to chatbots and to training models now. And so well-resourced threat actors can absolutely change the information environment in imperceptible ways. Yeah. And so I think of things like historical memory and ideas that we have just thought of as being settled pieces of history. The Russians and the Chinese have a clear interest in changing some of those narratives. And they can do it by just carpet bombing the information environment with their preferred narratives. And we've seen from studies that slowly starts to affect what chatbots spit out. And I say the average user, any user, is not going to quite understand that. And so the more that we're reliant on chatbots being the ones that spit back an answer to us, the more I'm concerned that we've lost sort of step one in the media literacy process, which is understand and know the source.
Yeah, right. I'll say just, I watched, went kind of viral, there's a 15-second clip of Brad Pitt fighting Tom Cruise that, an AI movie producer made with like 2 lines of code. Yeah. And I gotta say that, it was something that keeps me up at night, like where we're headed. What to you guys is kind of the one, sort of piece that you've seen recently that you're like, this is really concerning about where we're headed in the disinformation space?
So I would take a different approach there, because I think we were, and we should be, concerned about deep fakes. Mm-hmm. And before the 2024 election, not just the U.S. election. That was, considered the year of elections. There were elections everywhere, and everybody kept waiting for the deep fake that would sort of upend an election. And there were some that may have had an impact in Slovakia, for example. But I am less concerned about those individual pieces of content that are fakes, partly because the low-cost versions have always worked quite well. I mean, some of the most effective content manipulation is just changing the caption on a picture. It's a protest that happened in 2023. We're saying it happened yesterday. No sort of deepfake identification system is going to catch that. So I'm less concerned about those individual lies and what the technology can do, more concerned about how it's democratizing disinformation. You do not need to be well-resourced like the Chinese government or Russian intelligence to run a pretty wide-scale, sophisticated, targeted campaign if you have pretty basic understanding of how the tech works. To your point, this is no longer like you've got to be some savant that's able to create a manipulated piece of content. You just have to know how to write good prompts.
Yep.
That you can really target issues at the local level, and it can really now be the guy in his basement who can run a campaign that can cause some problems.
Yeah, my big concern is speed. One of the chapters in this book is about what happened in September of last year, just before the UN General Assembly in New York. The Secret Service announced that they had essentially broken open a SIM farm, which there were about 35 miles from the UN. There were a couple of apartment buildings that had 300 servers in them, but there were something like 300,000 SIMs that were connected to this SIM farm. And one of the former Secret Service senior agents, one of the sources that I spoke to, said that essentially that operation could spam the entire United States in 12 minutes with whatever messaging it wanted or that it was given. And the most disturbing thing for me was him telling me that you should talk to this guy, who is a former colleague of mine, who headed the Secret Service's global policing action for cyber. And he told me, yeah, that's just the one in New Jersey. He said that there are 3 or 4 others equal to or greater than that size in the United States, in the Midwest, the Southeast, the Northwest, that do the same thing that we don't know about, that haven't been made public. And so basically, if those were brought online and were tasked with the same kind of activity as the situation with the ones in New York or New Jersey, it's lights out. It's the speed of all of this that really concerns me. So the truck driver, the secretary, the person who doesn't have or watch a smartphone, I mean, everybody has one, but doesn't use their smartphone the way that so many people do for all of their news and for entertainment and et cetera, they just use it to make calls. But for those people who are out there who can receive these messages and not have a single clue where they came from and can just take action just because this tells them to do that, that is what worries me. The speed with which these things happen and the lack of time for people to make decisions who are unfamiliar with what's happening. And so that's one of the reasons why we're having this discussion today.
Yeah. No, this is super interesting. And I want to ask you, JJ, kind of, and then Brett. I mean, what do you say to the next generation of journalists and to you, the policymakers? I mean, what do you say to them about where we're headed with this?
Well, what I say to them is aside from read this book, but what I say to them is, and I'm not saying this to sell it, I'm saying this because I woke up 10 days after the Pentagon walkout, October 25th, at 3 o'clock in the morning. And my heart was racing. It was almost one of those kind of scenarios you see on television, but I woke up in the middle of 3 o'clock in the morning in a panic because it dawned on me, basically the adrenaline from the whole Pentagon situation had worn off, right? The phones had stopped, the emails had stopped, the support had stopped, and then I realized, oh my God, this happened to me. Will I be able to tell the story if I don't do something quickly? And then I asked myself, why do I need to tell the story? It's because there are younger journalists coming along whose responsibilities it's going to be to tell the story after I'm long gone. And what story are they going to tell? Will they know about the experiences that I and Brad and Thomas have had, in different places around the world at different times, recognizing and understanding the things, the forces that are at play that we never see on the evening news, but we know they're there. So what I am telling the journalist of the future is that this is the day when you have to get up and start looking differently at your information architecture around you. You have to start asking questions. And one of the best pieces of advice I got was when I spoke to the former director of the CIA and NSA about that. I asked him this question. His name is Michael Hayden. And he said, children in high school, like in elementary school, like when I was a kid, need to once again learn civics in school, in elementary, and study it with a vengeance in high school and certainly beyond. Learn to ask critical questions. Is that true? To be skeptical. And it's not to say don't trust anything, but learn to trust yourself. Put yourself, that's my message to the young journalist, is to take advantage of the opportunities to ask questions. And if it doesn't sit right, question it. Don't just accept it. I mean, this is not new stuff here, but it's more stuff because every day a new kid is born, and that kid should have the opportunity that everybody has.
I want to actually open it up to if there are any questions from the audience. Anybody have any questions for them? No? Yes. Sorry, go for it. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I was making sure. How do you separate yourself from the emotions that disinformation provokes? How do you suggest telling other people what is your advice for trying to do that? Because you're saying the power in disinformation is the emotions that it makes. People feel fear and anger and drives off of that. So how do you separate that?
Well, it's a great question, and I would say often not particularly well. I mean, I dislike the term inoculation, which has been around for 10 years now, in the sense that, if you just understand how disinformation works and the intention behind it and how systems work, that you are inoculated in the same way. If you got a little bit of a flu vaccine, you're not going to get the flu. It certainly helps, and I'm a big proponent of that kind of training, but all the time I am enraged by things I see that I know are inaccurate. And, I've seen people who work with me, who work on who fall victim to it. I mean, they're responsible enough that they're not promoting it, they're not helping make it worse, but it plays on your emotions in ways that I don't think anyone is impervious to. And so especially this idea that it's somehow a lack of education in general that causes people to kind of fall down rabbit holes, I disagree. I mean, I think there are the right buttons that people can push that can get anyone wound up. And this is, again, my concern with the sort of what's coming around the corner, is more and more of this will be personalized, hyper-personalized. So it's not just that they're segmenting you by like, okay, he's a white male in his 40s who's sort of center left and he lives here, and so we kind of know what he's going to like. They are going to know what you like and dislike very, very personally and individualistically. And so that is a real concern. So coming back around to your question, I mean, it does take getting out and touching grass every so often. I mean, really. And then, like, I am not on social media other than for work. I try to cut it off at a certain time at night, unless I am working on something. And on weekends, I just don't touch it. I have to disengage. I mean, I have to pull myself out of group chats. So it's there's some self-maintenance that has to come into play here. But to think that just because I do the work and understand it, that I'm somehow, impervious to the kind of draw that it has and getting me upset, no. I certainly am enraged sometimes.
So a lot of times people have asked me, as a reporter who's been embedded with the military 3 or 4 times in Afghanistan and Iraq, and have reported from conflict zones in 50 plus countries, I've lost friends and seen them die in wars, and lost other friends, in distant places that I wasn't at. But as I said earlier, maybe I didn't say that. Maybe my day is kind of collapsing on me, but truth has become the battlefield in so many conflicts around the world. And I believe that it's really important. You know how you get a flu shot every year for the flu? You can't just get one flu shot and be done with it. You have to get inoculated every year. So my point is, you have to keep educating yourself. Stay plugged in. There's a TV commercial for beer that says stay thirsty. I'm sure you've heard of that. College students, no? But with disinformation, you have to continuously inoculate yourself. And the education piece doesn't mean educated people, might not fall for it but I'm saying your level of education when it comes to it is the important thing. And that's where the inoculation comes from each year. Ever so often. I'm not saying you just do it once a year. I'm just saying you have to stay up on it so that you know what you're facing, what's out there, what you're dealing, what you're actually seeing, the authenticity of it. So in order not to make it really convoluted, just to simplify it a bit, that's the reason why I tried to put some tools and some tactics and some steps in play. One of the things that I suggest is, in Finland, for example, they have one of the best reputations, as you know, in the world for media literacy when it comes to dealing with disinformation, in part because they have suffered in the shadow of disinformation from the Soviet Union and then Russia. But they have these community structures where if somebody hears, or they're basically dealt a hand of disinformation, there are community leaders who will actually jump on it and start running it down, tracking it down. And there's things like community meetings, pulling people together to discuss things. Those are things that we can and should do. But again, as I mentioned earlier, we have to first get over our issues with each other to do things like that. And I think that's something that Thomas and both Brett mentioned as well, that other societies in other places around the world, in other places, that do it better because they've been forced to deal with it much longer. But I do think inoculation is important, but I just don't think it's something you do one and done.
Thank you.
Or actually, Poppy, you'll get the last question.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much for being here today and coming to talk to us. I was wondering, in a world where news and public opinion moves so quickly, largely in response to disinformation, things are being pumped out at mass speed and scale, how are those in power and policymakers, how can we slow down instead of speeding up to try and keep up with the demand of public opinion?
I don't know. It's a great question. I mean, I think you have identified the problem, right? Is the sort of overwhelming sense of the tsunami of news that just keeps hitting you and hitting you and hitting you, that doesn't allow you any sort of deep thought or to kind of respond to something that doesn't feel like an immediate crisis. So, going back to the point I just made about there needs to be a little bit of sort of personal maintenance involved in disconnecting and deciding when you do and do not engage with your phone and the news. But to your question of how policymakers deal with this, when now these big picture policy questions are often just left unaddressed because you're dealing with the sort of constant ping-ponging of issues that probably should not be the issues of the day. And this is one of my real concerns where we are right now is if you actually spend a lot of time following various news cycles over a period of time, so much of it is focused on issues that really should not be the substantive issues of the day. And you're seeing increasingly policymakers kind of chasing the clickbait. And you're seeing policy decisions made off the back of a viral video that within a few hours or a few days turns into a policy response. That we are just kind of zigging and zagging all over the place without addressing kind of these core fundamental issues that we should be. I think at some level that's intentional for some people to keep us in a sort of state of discombobulation. But I think for most policymakers, it's just the world that they inhabit like the rest of us, and they're having trouble finding their footing as well. So I come to you without an answer to that other than lamenting that is the position we're in. The one piece of advice I would have is, you can sort of shoot over the top of the moment. And whether you're a policymaker or just an individual, and actually try to get out of the conflict of the immediate, which feels like a non-starter to have a lot of substantive conversations, and just shoot over the top of it. So if we're talking about this issue, go to conservatives, go to progressives. Like, are you happy with this information environment? Do you think it's serving you personally? Do you think it's serving democracy? The answer I get, regardless of the political leaning, is no, absolutely not. And then so what should we do about that together? Because if you start from, like, who's at fault for the current state of our information space, and you get into the battle from the start, you're kind of lost because you get into your two positions there. So I do think it is helpful sometimes to kind of avoid the moment, shoot to the big picture, start where you can see maybe overlapping spaces of agreement, and work down from there. You'll eventually hit points of conflict, but at least you're not starting by punching each other in the face, figuratively or literally.
JJ, last word.
One of the things that, in talking about policymakers, that I've learned is that often these days policymakers leverage the confusion. I mentioned earlier that the truth has become a battlefield, and in many cases what policymakers, politicians, for sure, the narrative is more important than the truth. And so reminding ourselves of what we know as true, what our truth is, that it still exists, and we're still able to tell, speak, understand, and live the truth is a really, really key thing. But, I am a Pollyanna on this. I do believe that there's a way through this and a way out of this. And I do believe that, it can start with strangers. Embracing strangers is really important, because that is not judging someone, not putting someone in a position where they can't help us if we need them, or vice versa, by just putting them in a box. And so quite often that's one of the things that disinformation, regardless of who pulls the trigger, does. It looks for a way to divide us. So I think politicians, in many ways, sorry politicians, do that purposely now, looking for a way to prove the narrative as opposed to proving the truth. And sorry to leave you with that, but I think that's probably the best that I can do with that question.
All right, on that note, thank you guys so much. This was great. I don't know if I-
Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, appreciate it.
No, thank you. Appreciate it.